Okay, so today we're diving into something called Street Epistemology, or SE for short. We're going to be looking at this through the lens of activism. And activism, by its very nature, is about affecting change.
Yeah.
It has goals, it wants to influence, persuade, motivate action. And that's where there's this potential tension with SE, which is presented as this neutral way of examining things.
Yeah, there's a real potential clash there because the inherent goal orientation of activism can sometimes conflict with the supposed neutrality that SE aims for. It's like on the one hand, you have this method that emphasizes open-ended exploration, and on the other hand, you have activism, which often has a very specific destination in mind.
Right, and what we're going to unpack today is how these SE techniques, which seem, at first glance, very reasonable,
Reeling even.
yeah, exactly, can be both useful and potentially really misused when adopted by activists.
Yeah, and it's not just about activists disagreeing with someone's belief. We're going deeper than that. We're looking at two specific ways these techniques might be misused.
Okay.
First, the idea of SE being used as a really sophisticated tool for manipulation, for covert persuasion, almost a form of what some might call bad faith, SE, where the true intention isn't genuine exploration at all. And second, and this is even more unsettling, the idea of SE acting as a kind of Trojan horse used to disguise agendas that might be harmful.
Right.
And even facilitate perhaps recruitment to a cause or the normalization of certain ideas that, if presented directly, would be met with a lot more resistance.
Okay, so first, let's talk about why SE might be attractive to activists in the first place.
Well, think about it. If you're an activist trying to change someone's mind, you often run into this wall of defensiveness.
Yeah.
People get entrenched in their views when they feel like they're being attacked.
Right.
SE, with its focus on the how instead of the what, it seems to offer a way around that.
Right, like you're not directly attacking the belief.
Exactly. You're kind of sidestepping those defenses by not immediately challenging the content of what they believe.
Right. And some of the material we've been looking at even suggests that SE can lead to people genuinely reconsidering their beliefs.
Yeah, there are anecdotes out there, people sharing stories of how engaging in SE led them to revise their views.
And for an activist, that's powerful.
Absolutely. If you're aiming for change, the idea that you could facilitate someone's own journey towards your desired outcome, well, that's incredibly appealing.
And there's also a certain, intellectual appeal to the Socratic method.
Right, definitely.
It seems more thoughtful, more credible than just shouting slogans or, getting into heated arguments.
It does. It gives this air of intellectual rigor, which lends legitimacy to the engagement.
Right, like, I'm not just a zealot, I'm actually approaching this in a reasoned way.
Precisely. And that can be very disarming for the person they're engaging with.
But this is where we get to the concept of instrumentalization.
Right, exactly. The concern is that SE might become simply a tool, an instrument to achieve a predetermined goal persuasion. And in that process, it loses those core principles of genuine curiosity, of collaborative exploration.
It's like using a hammer, not for building, but only for demolition. You're missing the point of the tool.
Perfect analogy. It becomes about winning, not understanding.
Okay, so let's dive into this first big area of potential misuse.
Yeah.
SE as this sophisticated manipulation tactic, this covert persuasion. How does that actually play out?
Well, the key is that the activist might adopt the form of SE, the questions, the listening, but the underlying intention is no longer about genuine exploration. It's about subtly guiding the other person towards the conclusion the activist already has in mind.
Okay, so what are some of the specific mechanisms, the manipulative techniques involved?
One is what we might call feigned curiosity and rapport. So the activist might act exceptionally interested in your reasoning, maybe even mirroring your language or emotions. But it's not genuine. It's a tactic to build trust, to make you more susceptible to their influence.
So it's not about connecting, it's about, strategic charm.
Yeah, exactly. Think about Cialdini's work on persuasion. One of his principles is liking. We tend to be more persuaded by people we like. Well, bad faith SE can artificially create this sense of liking, even though it's not based on a genuine connection.
Okay, so red flag number one.
Yeah.
If someone's interest feels a little too performative, it might be a tactic.
Exactly. Then you have what we might call leading Socratic questions. A genuine Socratic question is open-ended. It's meant to probe the other person's thinking.
Right.
But in manipulative SE, the questions are carefully crafted to nudge you toward certain insights or to highlight contradictions that just happen to support the activist's position.
Can you give an example of what a leading question like that might sound like?
Sure. Imagine someone's arguing for a specific political policy and the activist is against it. Instead of saying, that policy is flawed, they might ask, given the potential negative consequences of this policy, how confident are you that it will actually achieve its intended goals?
Ah, I see. So they're baking in a negative assumption right there in the question.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's planting a seed of doubt.
Okay, that makes sense. What else? What are some other ways they might manipulate the conversation?
Another technique is the strategic exploration of doubt. So the activist might focus their questions almost exclusively on areas where your certainty is weakest or your reasoning feels a bit shaky.
They're going for the weak spots.
Yeah. They're not trying to understand your belief system as a whole. They're looking for those vulnerabilities they can exploit.
It's kind of like a lawyer during a cross-examination, zeroing in on inconsistencies.
There's a parallel there, yeah.
Yeah.
But disguised as this friendly, inquisitive dialogue.
Right.
And then you have selective reflection and framing. They might repeat back parts of what you've said, but they'll do it in a way that highlights certain things, maybe inconsistencies or things that align with their own narrative.
Right.
And conveniently leave out anything that doesn't fit their agenda.
So they're cherry picking.
Exactly. And finally, there's the exploitation of cognitive dissonance. By cleverly pointing out contradictions between your beliefs or values and your stated ways of knowing, they can induce this internal discomfort.
Right, because people don't like to hold contradictory beliefs.
Exactly. And Festiner's research showed that people are really motivated to resolve that dissonance. So the manipulative activist will then try to steer you towards resolving that dissonance in a way that conveniently aligns with their own position.
It's like, oh, you feel uncomfortable? Well, here's the solution. Agree with me.
Right. It's a very subtle form of persuasion.
Our cows are watching. Be the cream of the crop. Join our subscriber list today.
It's like a gentle nudge.
Yeah.
It's not aggressive. It's more like, hey, come on, don't miss out.
Yeah, don't be left out in the pasture.
Exactly.
Subscribe, and we'll name the next cow after you. Okay, these are some pretty subtle, but powerful tactics.
Yeah.
Can you give us some concrete examples of how this might play out in real-world activism?
Sure. Let's say you have an animal rights activist using these techniques. They might engage someone who eats meat in a conversation about how they know that eating meat is ethical. But they'll do it by focusing their questions solely on the potential for animal suffering in factory farms or on the environmental impact of meat production.
Right.
They're not explicitly saying eating meat is wrong, but they're subtly leading the person to question their own justifications.
It's like chipping away at the foundation without directly addressing the structure itself.
Exactly. It's about creating doubt, not engaging in a genuine exchange of ideas.
What about in, say, a political context?
Well, a political activist might target someone who supports a particular candidate or party, and they might do it by asking questions designed to highlight inconsistencies in that party's platform or to make them question the reliability of the news sources they trust.
So it's not really about understanding the other person's political views. It's about trying to make them doubt their own position.
Exactly. The aim is to weaken their allegiance, not to have a genuine conversation about politics.
Okay, so it sounds like bad faith, SE, is a pretty clear ethical breach. It's violating that trust that's supposed to be at the heart of genuine dialogue.
Absolutely. It goes against the very principles of SE, which are supposed to be about curiosity, collaboration, respecting the other person's autonomy.
Right.
This is more akin to, the sophists of ancient Greece who were known for prioritizing persuasive rhetoric over truth.
Okay, that's a pretty damning comparison. All right, so let's move on to that second area of concern, which is SE being used as a Trojan horse to mask potentially harmful agendas. This sounds even more insidious.
It can be. This is where that surface-level reasonableness of SE, that open-mindedness it projects, is used to make ideologies or groups that might otherwise be immediately rejected seem more palatable.
So it's about using SE to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, it's about using the image of SE to gain access and build trust.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? What are some of the tactics they might use?
One tactic is what we might call the benign facade. So you have groups or individuals who hold views that are frankly, harmful.
Right.
We're talking extremist political views, pseudoscience, conspiracy theories, hate groups, you name it. And they might use SE techniques in their public interactions, on social media, wherever they're trying to engage people, because that calm, questioning demeanor can make them seem less threatening, more intellectual.
Right, so it's disarming.
Exactly. It might attract people who would normally steer clear of those views if they were presented more directly.
Okay, so it's like putting on a sheep's clothing.
Precisely. Another tactic you probably heard of is just asking questions, or J-kinging off.
Oh yeah, I've seen that online.
It's a classic. Someone will bring up a controversial idea, maybe a conspiracy theory, and they'll frame it as, I'm just asking questions.
Right.
It's a way to introduce potentially harmful ideas without taking ownership of them.
Right, like don't blame me, I'm just curious.
Exactly. They're testing the waters, seeing how receptive people are.
And how does SE fit into that?
Well, they might use Socratic-sounding questions to lead people towards their conclusion. They might say, don't you think it's strange that? Or, isn't it possible that?
Right, so they're nudging people towards a certain way of thinking.
Exactly. And then there's infiltration and normalization. So activists with harmful agendas might target specific communities or online spaces, and they'll engage in what seem like benign SE conversations. Maybe they'll ask about people's values, their doubts, their sense of purpose in life.
Okay.
And over time, as they build trust, they'll start to introduce elements of their ideology.
So it's a gradual process.
Very much so. It's like a slow drip of poison.
Wow. That's pretty disturbing.
It is. And then there's strategic ambiguity. Remember, SE focuses on how you know something, not necessarily what you believe.
Right.
So an activist can avoid explicitly stating their own controversial views, at least initially. They can maintain this veneer of neutrality while steering the conversation towards themes or questions that align with their agenda.
It's like leading you down a path without revealing where it ends.
Exactly. They're playing the long game.
Okay, so can you give us some specific examples of how this might play out in different activist contexts?
Sure. Think about certain online groups that are promoting, say, white supremacist ideology or anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. They might engage people in conversations about social issues or health concerns. They might ask seemingly innocent questions about the reliability of mainstream media or the motivations of scientists and doctors.
Right.
But their real goal is to sow doubt, to create an opening for their own harmful narratives.
Wow, that's really chilling.
It is, and it's happening all the time online.
What about in, say, the context of high control groups, like cults?
Yeah, cult recruiters are notorious for using techniques that resemble SE. They might start a conversation by asking about your life, your dreams, your frustrations.
Right.
They're looking for vulnerabilities they can exploit. And then they might subtly suggest that their group has the answers you're seeking, that they can provide a sense of purpose or community that you're lacking.
So it's all about creating a sense of need and then offering their group as the solution.
Exactly. And all of this is done under the guise of open-mindedness and genuine concern.
Unlock the tools to rethink, reflect, and grow. Sign up for our free course at navigatingbeliefs.com.
I like the word unlock. It's like there's this potential within you, but you need the right key.
Right, it's like a treasure chest or something.
Exactly.
This is all really disturbing. It feels like such a betrayal of the principles of open dialogue.
It is. And the real danger is that it can poison people's trust in genuine inquiry.
Right, if you start to see SE as just another manipulation tactic, then you're going to be less likely to engage in any kind of open conversation.
Exactly. It creates a climate of suspicion and cynicism, which is the opposite of what SE is supposed to be about.
So what are the broader consequences of all this? How does this misuse of SE actually impact the world around us?
Well, I think the biggest consequence is the damage it does to SE's credibility. When SE is associated with manipulation and harmful agendas, people who are genuinely trying to use it for good are going to face an uphill battle.
Right, it's like they're having to overcome this baggage that's been attached to the technique.
Exactly. And beyond that, it erodes trust in open conversations more generally. People become wary of anyone who asks too many questions. They start to suspect ulterior motives.
Right, it creates this atmosphere of like intellectual paranoia.
Yeah, and that's a real shame because open dialogue is essential for a healthy society. And then there's the very real possibility that people will be manipulated into adopting harmful beliefs.
Right, because they're being led down a path without realizing where it leads.
Exactly. They might think they're engaging in a genuine exploration of ideas, but they're actually being subtly steered towards a particular conclusion.
And that's especially dangerous when it comes to things like extremism or conspiracy theories.
Absolutely. And finally, this kind of manipulative SE can actually hinder progress on important social issues.
How so?
Well, instead of fostering understanding and collaboration, it creates division and distrust.
Right, it turns dialogue into a weapon.
Exactly. And that's not helpful for anyone.
So given all of this, how can we as listeners, as participants in conversations, try to distinguish genuine SE from these more problematic uses? Are there any red flags we should be looking out for?
It's not always easy, but there are definitely some things to watch out for. One is the practitioner's intent.
Okay.
Do they seem genuinely curious about your perspective? Or are they more focused on finding holes in your argument?
Right.
Are they willing to turn the lens on themselves to examine their own beliefs? Or do they deflect those kinds of questions?
So genuine curiosity should be a two-way street.
Exactly. Another thing to pay attention to is the nature of their questions. Are they truly open-ended? Or do they feel loaded, like they're designed to lead you towards a specific conclusion?
Right.
And how do they react to disagreement? If you push back, do they become defensive or try to shut down the conversation?
Okay, so defensiveness is a bad sign.
It can be. A genuine practitioner should be open to being challenged, to having their own views questioned.
Makes sense.
And then there's the issue of transparency. Are they upfront about their own beliefs and biases?
Right.
Or do they keep them hidden? Someone who's using SE in good faith should be willing to be open about their own perspective.
Okay, so that's something to keep in mind.
And finally, it's always worth considering the context. Who is this person? What groups are they affiliated with? Do those groups have a history of using manipulative tactics?
Right, so do your research.
Exactly. Because sometimes the best way to spot a wolf in sheep's clothing is to know what the wolf looks like.
That's a good point. So I guess the big question here is, can SE, in its pure form, actually coexist with the goals of activism?
It's a tough one. I think SE can be very valuable for introspection, for helping activists examine their own beliefs and refine their arguments.
Right.
But when it comes to outward-facing activism, where the goal is often to persuade others, I think there's a real danger of it being misused.
Right, it's like walking a tightrope.
Exactly. And it requires a very high level of self-awareness and ethical commitment to make sure you're not straying into manipulation territory.
Well, this has certainly given us a lot to think about. So to wrap up, it seems like street epistemology can be a useful tool for examining beliefs. But those same techniques can also be misused by activists and others for less than noble purposes.
Absolutely. It can be used as a sophisticated form of persuasion or even as a mask to conceal harmful agendas.
And as we've discussed, that can have serious consequences, both for individuals and for society as a whole.
It's crucial for all of us to be aware of these potential dangers. We need to be critical thinkers, we need to be aware of the tactics that are being used, and we need to be willing to call out manipulation when we see it.
So as a final thought for our listeners, when you encounter someone using SE techniques, ask yourself, are they genuinely curious? Or are they trying to manipulate you? And what responsibility do we all have to engage in dialogue ethically, especially when we're passionate about making a difference in the world? These are important questions to consider as we navigate the increasingly complex landscape of information and persuasion. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Rational Ruminations delivers the innovative concepts that shape this podcast.
So the research was AI-powered, and the hosts are AI.